Back in Christmas 2017, when I made the jump from Xbox to PlayStation, there was really three games that I had in mind that I was really looking forward to getting to play. One of those was Horizon Zero Dawn, and then the other two were games that hadn't been released yet, being Marvel's Spider-Man and, of course, God of War. And all these years later, looking back, all three of those games ended up being phenomenal and some of my favorite games of all time, but God of War really stands out as not only one of my favorite games of all time, but the game that defined the entire last console generation for me. This was my favorite game of this generation, and even now, having played its sequel, which I will not touch on much in this video, it's going to get its own, of course, this game really still stands out as the special game that it was, And today I'm going to be talking about what makes this game so special and why I think that you should play it and why I think that everybody should play it. Because if you were somebody who was looking to buy a PlayStation, whether that's a 4 or a 5, God of War is one of the first games that I would recommend. It probably is the first game that I would recommend you try out for a newcomer. And so today I'm going to be talking about why and give my thoughts on the game as well as just a proper review. Now, needless to say, I'm pretty sure you can guess that this game is already getting a perfect score of a 10 out of 10. So, let's just go ahead and hop right into why I think that. So we're going to go ahead and start things off with the story here, as I always try to with my reviews, and as also is true for most of my reviews, I do think the story is kind of the selling point for what makes this game so special. You follow Kratos, who, after the last, games that he was in, has moved to a brand new world, which to us is a mystery, and we follow him and his son Atreus on a journey to spread Atreus' mother's ashes across the the peak of the highest mountain in the Nine Realms. And so it's kind of a simple premise, but you get about a 25 to 30 hour campaign out of that, depending on how much side stuff you do along the way. And so you can imagine that simple premise does not lead to a simple story, but it's a very well told story. Of course, if you've played any of the older God of War games, then maybe this experience is enlightened a little bit, but one of the things that I really liked is that you do not need to play any of the older God of War games, which is why I'm assuming this game was not called God of War 4 and was just retitled God of War, because it does act as a bit of a reboot to the franchise. The older games took place in a completely different land, Atreus didn't exist, and the setting and tone was very different, and so speaking on behalf of somebody who hadn't played a God of War game before this one, if you're somebody who's never played one and you're looking to start here, you can definitely do that. And if you enjoy it as much as I did, then you'll also enjoy going back and playing the older games as well. With that being said, along the way, the journey really helps grow these characters together. Of course, you have Kratos, who's a bit of a hard ass, and Atreus, who views the situation as, I'm never going to be good enough for my dad. And throughout the course of the game, you really watch these guys develop, both individually but also collectively. The bond that these two form over the course of the game is really something special. And to me, what pretty much makes this game so special for me, of course, you do have other characters you meet along the way, and I like all of these characters. I don't think that there's anybody that really stood out for being bad in any way, and every single character that you meet in this game also goes through some crazy growth by the end. It's really rare that you see a game with such fleshed out characters as this one. By the end, nobody is in the same place that they were when they started. It's a journey for everybody involved, but especially these two main characters. And again, like I said earlier, that's really what makes this game so special for me, and what makes this game truly elite. And one thing I wanted to touch on as well, which is kind of the entire next segment that I wanted to touch on anyways, so it works, is the world. Because in this game, there's 9 realms, and you don't go to all of the 9 realms. As a matter of fact, 2 of the 9 realms aren't even unlockable. I think you can unlock them before you beat the story, but you have to unlock them. They're not part of the story. And all of these realms, you can see, especially Midgar, though, feel very desolate. In Alfheim, for example, one of the realms you go to, there's all the elves, and there's a civil war going on between the elves. And then in you go to Helheim and you see the spirits of the damned, and then you come back to Midgar and suddenly there's nobody. It's just the undead Draugr that are starting to roam the lands, and you realize that, for a game that for a franchise that's known for up until this point being about just nonstop action, 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 and brutal god slaying, you realize that this game is a bit more stripped back and the story is more personal. There aren't nearly as many gods to fight in this game as there are in the other ones. Likewise, the gods are basically non-existent, and you realize just kind of throughout the game that, they're selfish and they're clearly letting the world go to ruin because it doesn't matter to them. And the gods that you do meet along the way are very good representations of where they all feel because, there's a reason that Kratos is after these guys, or more likely, or more accurately, why they're after him. And so, you know, it's one of my favorite pieces about this game. How the rest of the franchise, I would even argue, God of War Ragnarok included, is all about fighting the gods and multiple gods and kind of this larger scale. But this game feels very stripped back, and I think that's why even now this is still my favorite God of War game, is because it's a more personal story and a more kind of desolate world, even though it's the same world the next one's set in. That being said, we're going to go ahead and move on to gameplay, which is also debatably stripped back from the older games, in the sense that it's much slower and different. So in your old school God of War, you have more of a hack and slash action, think Devil May Cry. Uh, but this game, I hate to make this comparison, but I'm going to make this comparison. You get more of a slower, almost Dark Souls-y combat feel. However, part of the reason I hate making that comparison is because this game stands itself apart enough. I simply compare it to that because of the third-person action, bit slower-paced combat. And for people that haven't played it before, Dark Souls is probably a pretty accurate, at least base comparison. However, the gameplay in this game is really great. You have the Leviathan axe right from the start, which is, think Thor's hammer in the sense that you can throw it and call it back, and you can chop people up with it as a melee weapon. Of course, you have different charged attacks you can use, and then of course you have Spartan Rage, which you can see me use in this clip here, where you just wail on them with your fists. And it's a very fun game, and I don't really ever get tired of the combat, even after roughly 40 hours and getting the Platinum Trophy. And to be honest, I think I've earned this Platinum Trophy twice now over the years. I've never gotten sick of the gameplay, as it constantly evolves as the game goes on, and evolves as, it needs to, and it keeps things fresh, and it keeps things moving. And just again to reiterate, I think that the gameplay is really strong here, and for being kind of slower paced, your actions feel more brutal, and that, less is more, in the sense that what you're doing, you can feel the blow. When you hit somebody with the axe, you can really feel the damage and feel the destruction with it, and I like that. One of my favorite pieces of this game as well is the acting. All of these characters are very well acted. As a matter of fact, the actor who plays Kratos won the Game of the Year award for actor in a video game for the sequel to this. But that should give you an idea of how good his performance is overall, because, man, when you're watching cutscenes in this game, or even just listening in on dialogue, you feel like you're watching a movie. It's very impressive, and it's very, it helps you get immersed into the world and into the story when you feel so close to these characters, and you're able to feel so close to these characters because they feel like they're real people, thanks to the way that the actors bring them to life. The last thing I wanted to touch on in this review is the side content, because as I mentioned, I have platinumed this game twice. In case you were wondering, it was 2 different accounts. And I gotta tell you, if you're looking for a game that'll keep you busy, and it really strikes a perfect balance of having a lot to do and not being too big. This is basically the perfect game for that. There's tons of side things you can do, whether it's secret bosses after you've beaten the game, whether it's, artifacts, or like I mentioned earlier, there's literal realms you can unlock just by going around and finding the side content. This game will keep you busy, but again, I think it's not too much. I think sometimes you get games that have too much side content, And if you're trying to do all of it, you can just get a little overwhelmed by the end. And this is not one of those games by any means, and I love it. And it's one of my favorite platinum trophies. If you're somebody that cares about that sort of thing or somebody that is interested, this is absolutely a trophy that or a platinum trophy I would recommend going for. Or even if you're just playing it on like PC, I would recommend searching out this side content anyways, for not even for the trophies because it's worth it to see the extra story bits. And you know, there's entire chunks of story that you don't get to experience unless you do the side content. One of those, I think my favorite piece of the side content has to be those secret optional bosses I mentioned. You know, I'm somebody who has beaten multiple Dark Souls games or games in that franchise and is relatively good at this type of game, the third person action, and the final optional boss in this game had me on the ropes and is one of the toughest bosses that I can remember fighting in a video game. And it was really unexpected, but also really enjoyable to kind of have that there waiting for you. And so again, if you're somebody that chooses to seek out the side content in this game, there's tons of it, and it's very much worth checking out. And just really heightens the experience, I think. Alright, as I mentioned at the beginning of the review, this game's a 10 out of 10. There's no point in doing my usual title card kind of final thoughts at the end, because, again, as I mentioned, this is my favorite game of the entire last generation of games, and so yeah, there's no point in trying to pretend like it was going to be anything other than a perfect score of 10 out of 10. With that being said, guys, thank you so much for watching today's video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more videos like this. I've got my review of God of War Ragnarok already edited and is basically just needing me to put some finishing touches on it, so expect that shouldn't be too far away. However, I do want to give this review some time to breathe and this, give it its own time or whatever, so I'm not going to post that one quite so immediately. But if you're somebody, like I mentioned earlier, that's looking to get a PlayStation or did get a PlayStation and you're thinking about trying out God of War as one of your first games, go for it. This is probably, like I mentioned at the beginning, the game that I would recommend first for somebody getting a PlayStation. It's I honestly, as somebody, like I said, I've beaten the game 4 or 5 times, platinumed it twice. There's not a single negative thing that I could really think to say about this game. And that's really a testament to just how pretty much perfect I would say this game is. As I said already, thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you guys back in the next video.